My name's Luke, I'm 27, and if you've ever dealt with family who think boundaries are optional, then you'll probably understand how I ended up in this mess. I've always been the guy in my family who people think is too serious. I don't drink much, I keep to myself, and I work in finance, which apparently makes me the banker relative, even though I've had to work tooth and nail for every cent I've earned. My cousin Eric, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. He's 29, impulsive, lazy when it suits him, and always has some half-baked scheme he swears is about to blow up. He's the kind of guy who brags about how he's going to be a millionaire by 30 while asking to borrow gas money from his mom the next day. For years, Eric's been in and out of trouble with money. Payday loans, maxed out credit cards, and a failed attempt at starting a luxury sneaker reselling business that ended with him selling most of his own shoes just to pay rent. His mom, my Aunt Donna, always covered for him. If he was late on rent, she paid it. If his car got repossessed, she drove him everywhere. She'd sigh and say things like, "He just needs a little push to get on his feet." Meanwhile, my own parents used me as the family example of how hard work pays off, but that never earned me much respect. If anything, it made me the target for every relative who thought I was stuck up. Things came to a head at a family gathering a couple of months ago. It was at Aunt Donna's house. One of those forced family dinners where everyone squeezes into a space too small for the number of bodies inside, and the air feels heavy with unspoken tensions. Eric cornered me in the kitchen after dessert, his breath smelling faintly of beer, with that smug grin he always wears when he thinks he's being charming. "Hey man," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "I've got this incredible opportunity. I just need a cosigner for a small loan. Nothing big, just 50 grand. Easy money." I laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't. He pulled out a crumpled folder from his backpack and laid out papers covered in half-filled forms and vague projections about some crypto-backed business he wanted to launch. I told him no immediately. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. I just said, "Eric, I'm not putting my credit on the line for this. You know I can't do that." His smile faltered, then twisted into this mocking smirk. He said, "Man, you act like you're better than me. I thought family had each other's backs." I repeated my no, firmer this time, and walked back into the living room. But Eric wasn't done. An hour later, when people were leaving, I went to grab my phone from the counter. He picked it up before I could, held it out like he was offering it to me, then suddenly smashed it against the wall. The screen shattered instantly, glass scattering across the floor. Everyone froze. I just stared at him, my chest tight with disbelief. "Relax, it's just a joke," he laughed, his voice cutting through the silence like nails on glass. Aunt Donna rushed over, but instead of scolding him, she just shrugged and said, "Luke, you can always buy another one. Don't make such a fuss." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I felt my jaw clench, and something in me went cold. I picked up the broken pieces of my phone, slid them into my pocket, and told everyone I was leaving. The ride home was quiet, just me and the weight of what had happened pressing down on my chest. It wasn't about the phone, it was about what it meant. To them, my hard work, my time, my boundaries didn't matter. Eric could smash something I paid for with my own sweat, and it was brushed off as if I was overreacting. That night, lying in bed with my useless phone sitting on the nightstand, I thought about every time Eric had taken without giving, every time Aunt Donna had excused him, and every time I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. By sunrise the next morning, I had already started thinking about my next move. Because Eric had no idea just how much I knew, and just how much power I had to turn his jokes into something he would never laugh about again. And when he opened his bank app that morning, the look on his face said it all. When Eric opened his bank app that morning, he didn't realize I was sitting across from him at Aunt Donna's kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee. I had come by early to grab something I'd accidentally left the night before. He had just woken up, still groggy, hair sticking up in all directions. He slid into the chair across from me, unlocked his phone, and the smirk on his face drained almost instantly. His jaw slackened, his eyes darted from the screen to me, then back again. "What the?" he muttered under his breath, his voice barely more than a whisper. I kept my expression neutral, stirring the coffee like I hadn't noticed anything. Aunt Donna shuffled in from the hallway a minute later, tying her robe. She glanced at Eric, who was pale now, tapping furiously at his screen. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" she asked, her tone dripping with that same indulgence she'd always reserved for him. Eric hesitated. His lips pressed into a thin line before he snapped the phone shut and shoved it into his pocket. "Nothing. Just a glitch," he muttered. But the way his hands trembled, the way his knee bounced against the leg of the table, told me it was something much bigger. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Whatever he saw, he'd brought it on himself. And the best part was, he didn't even know how deep this was going to cut yet. But Eric wasn't the type to retreat quietly. He was a cornered dog now, and instead of reflecting on his actions, he lashed out. That afternoon, he went around telling relatives that I had embarrassed him the night before, that I'd humiliated him in front of everyone by refusing to co-sign his loan. He painted me as the selfish cousin who thought he was too good for family. It didn't take long before my phone, well, the replacement I had to buy, was buzzing with texts from relatives. One uncle sent me, "Come on, Luke, it's just paperwork. You know Eric's got good ideas. Why can't you help him get started?" Another aunt chimed in with, "I thought families supported each other no matter what. You could make such a difference for him." Each message felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. Not one of them asked how I was doing after having my phone smashed. Not one of them cared that Eric had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. To them, it was still about protecting Eric, cushioning him from consequences. I tried explaining, calmly, that co-signing wasn't a small favor, that it meant my credit, my future, was tied to his choices. Most of them brushed it off. "It's just numbers on a screen, Luke," Aunt Donna said when I confronted her. "Eric needs this. He's finally trying to do something with his life. Don't be so rigid." Rigid. That was her word for me. Because I wasn't willing to sacrifice my hard-earned stability for her son's reckless gamble, I was rigid. Eric, emboldened by the pity everyone showered on him, grew bolder in his disrespect. At a family barbecue the following weekend, he made a show of mocking me. Holding up his beer, he shouted across the yard, "Careful, everyone. Don't let Luke near your stuff. He'll probably run your credit before handing it back." His friends laughed. Even some cousins chuckled awkwardly. I forced a smile, but inside I was burning. Not from embarrassment, but from the realization that no one was going to stop him. No one was going to step in and tell him enough was enough. And that gave him power. Later that night, when most people had left, I overheard Aunt Donna in the kitchen, her voice low but sharp. "Luke needs to stop being so difficult. If he really loved his family, he'd sign those papers. Eric's under so much stress, and Luke's just making it worse. Sometimes I wonder if he even cares about us at all." Those words cut deeper than I expected. I had always cared. I had bent over backwards to be respectful, to show up at gatherings, to help whenever I could. But now, caring wasn't enough, because caring didn't mean handing them everything they wanted. That was when something shifted in me. It wasn't just about Eric anymore. It was about the years of being dismissed, of having my boundaries ignored, of being treated like a walking wallet instead of a person. And as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized this wasn't going to stop until I made it stop. And Eric had no idea how far I was willing to go to make that happen. The breaking point came faster than I expected, and it hit me harder than I ever thought it would. 2 weeks after the barbecue, I got a call from my bank. The voice on the other end was polite but firm. "Mr. Bennett, we're calling to verify your recent loan application. It appears you applied for a business loan of $50,000, co-signed with Eric Donovan." My heart stopped. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went white. "What?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "No, I never applied for any loan. And I most definitely did not co-sign with Eric." There was a pause. Then the banker cleared his throat. "That's strange. The documents we received include your name, your information, even a copy of your ID." I felt my stomach drop. My ID, which I had only left in one place recently, at Aunt Donna's, when I'd helped her fill out some paperwork for a small insurance claim she didn't understand. I had left my wallet on the table for maybe 20 minutes while I went outside to grab something from my car. "Send me a copy," I managed to say, my voice low and trembling with rage. When the email arrived, my chest went cold. There it was, my name scrawled in handwriting that wasn't mine, my signature forged at the bottom of a contract tying me to Eric's debt. The date lined up perfectly with the barbecue. While I was outside grilling, laughing with a few cousins, Eric had been inside, digging through my wallet. I wanted to deny it, to believe maybe it was some clerical error, but the evidence was undeniable. He had done it. My own cousin had forged my name, stolen my information, and tried to rope me into his latest scheme. I drove straight to Aunt Donna's that evening, contract printout in hand. Eric was sitting on the couch, game controller in hand, like nothing had happened. Aunt Donna was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared dinner. "Eric," I said, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. "Care to explain this?" He glanced down at them, and for a split second, I saw a panic flash in his eyes. But then he leaned back, smirking like it was all just some misunderstanding. "Relax, man. It's no big deal. I was just speeding things up. You were going to cave eventually. I just saved you the trouble." "Saved me the trouble?" My voice cracked, fury bubbling up in my chest. "You forged my signature. That's fraud. Do you even realize what kind of trouble this could get me into?" He shrugged, actually shrugged, and said, "Come on, Luke. You've got the credit, I don't. It's just numbers on a screen. You'll barely notice. And when this business takes off, we'll both be rich." Before I could respond, Aunt Donna walked in, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She took one look at the papers and then at me. "Luke," she said softly, "don't make a scene. He just needs a chance. If you love your family, you'll let this go. It's already done now." That sentence broke something inside me. If I loved my family, I'd let this go? My own aunt, who had known me since I was a child, was standing there excusing her son committing fraud against me. Not only excusing it, but guilt-tripping me into silence. I stood there, staring at the two of them. Eric, lounging like he'd won, and Aunt Donna, looking at me like I was the problem, and I felt the final thread of trust snap. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was betrayal. Deep, deliberate betrayal. I walked out without another word, but inside, my thoughts were screaming. Every ounce of loyalty I'd held onto was gone. The respect, the patience, the willingness to bite my tongue for the sake of keeping peace. All of it had burned away. And in its place was something sharper, colder. I wasn't going to just protect myself anymore. I was going to make sure Eric learned what it meant to cross me. Walking out of Aunt Donna's house that night, I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. The betrayal wasn't just shocking, it was suffocating. My mind kept circling the same thought. My own family had stolen from me, signed my name onto something that could have ruined my life, and then had the audacity to tell me to let it go because family sticks together. The next few days were brutal. I barely slept, tossing and turning with flashes of Eric's smug grin and Aunt Donna's calm, almost motherly scolding. At work, I found myself staring at spreadsheets without actually seeing them, my mind consumed by the mess waiting outside those office walls. I had always prided myself on being steady, grounded, dependable. Now I felt like I was cracking in places I didn't even know could break. The worst part was the whispers. Somehow, Eric had spun the story before I even had the chance. Suddenly, cousins who used to greet me warmly at gatherings now gave me side eyes, their words tinged with judgment. "Why's Luke being so dramatic about some paperwork?" one cousin muttered when he thought I was out of earshot. Another chimed in, "Eric just wants to better himself. Luke's always been stingy." Stingy. That word stung more than I cared to admit. I wasn't stingy. I had worked for everything I had, scraped my way up from part-time jobs in high school to a solid career in finance. I'd never asked anyone in the family for a dime. And yet, somehow, I was painted as the villain for not handing my stability over to Eric like it was pocket change. Then came the bank calls. Even though I disputed the application, the paperwork had already triggered alerts. My credit monitoring app buzzed with warnings, and I had to spend hours on hold with customer service, explaining, faxing documents, proving that the signature wasn't mine. One rep even sounded skeptical. "Mr. Bennett, are you sure you didn't authorize this? It has all your information." The implication cut deep, that maybe I was lying. Maybe I wasn't the victim at all. I felt like I was drowning. Every day brought another reminder that my family had not only betrayed me, but left me to clean up the wreckage. And no one was offering to help. Aunt Donna avoided my calls entirely. And when I showed up at her door one evening to demand, she set the record straight. She didn't even open it. She just shouted through the wood, "Luke, stop this nonsense. You're tearing the family apart." Tearing the family apart. The irony made my chest ache. As if I had been the one to forge the signature, to gamble with someone else's future. For the first time in my life, I skipped a family gathering. It was my dad's birthday dinner, and normally, no matter how tense things got, I'd show up out of respect. But I couldn't bring myself to walk into that room. to sit across from Eric and pretend nothing had happened. The fallout was immediate. My phone lit up with texts. Wow. Cold move, Luke. Your dad's hurt. You couldn't suck it up for one night. You're being dramatic. Just forgive Eric already. Every message was another nail in the coffin of my relationship with them. And yet, as painful as it was, the distance gave me clarity. Alone in my apartment, I started jotting things down. Every time Eric had borrowed money and forgotten to pay it back, every story Aunt Donna had told to excuse his behavior, every slight, every manipulation. I wasn't making a list for pity. I was building a record. Something inside me knew I was done playing defense. One evening, I sat in the dark staring at my phone, the glow of the cracked replacement screen lighting up my hands. I whispered to myself, if no one else is going to hold him accountable, I will. The words felt heavy, final, like crossing a line I couldn't step back from. It hurt, yes, more than I could explain. But beneath the hurt was something else, something that had been growing quietly, almost invisibly. A plan. A cold, deliberate plan. And Eric, he had no idea that the cousin he thought was too rigid and stingy was about to show him what it really meant to be ruthless. After weeks of feeling like I was barely keeping my head above water, something inside me shifted. The weight of the betrayal didn't vanish overnight, but slowly, it hardened into resolve. I realized that if I let Eric and Aunt Donna define the narrative, that I was selfish, stingy, the villain, then they would keep doing it until there was nothing left of me. But if I rebuilt myself, not just financially but emotionally, I could rise above the mess they had tried to drag me into. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into projects, volunteering for the toughest assignments, the ones everyone else sidestepped. Long hours in the office didn't feel like a burden anymore. They felt like armor, each completed task layering another plate of protection over the rawness inside me. My boss noticed. Within months, I was promoted to a senior analyst role, and with the promotion came not just more responsibility, but a higher salary. Suddenly, the hours I had once dreaded were paying off in ways I hadn't expected. At the same time, I began building outside of work. The ordeal with Eric had taught me how vulnerable I was to the actions of others, and I swore never again. I consulted friends in law, learned the ins and outs of protecting my credit, and locked down every account with multi-layered security. I started small investments on the side, taking the knowledge I'd been applying at work and using it to grow my own portfolio. And it worked. By the end of the year, I wasn't just stable, I was thriving. The contrast between my life and Eric's became impossible to ignore. Through the grapevine, I heard about his business. It hadn't taken off. In fact, it had crumbled before it even started. He had burned through what little money he managed to scrape together, left unpaid bills in his wake, and gone crawling back to Aunt Donna. She covered him, of course, but even her patience had limits. Rumors spread that her retirement savings were dwindling because of his constant demands. And while Eric spun his wheels, I was climbing. I upgraded my car, not out of vanity, but because I could finally afford something reliable and comfortable. I moved into a larger apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. At night, I'd sit by the glass with a drink in hand, watching the city lights flicker and think, this is mine. No one handed it to me. No one can take it away. But success wasn't just about money. It was about power, the quiet kind, the kind people don't notice until it's too late. I made connections at work, built relationships with people in banking, law, even real estate. I wasn't bragging or showing off. I was weaving a net, one that would support me when I needed it and tighten around anyone who tried to cross me again. And all the while, I kept my distance from family gatherings. Each time I declined an invitation, the texts became sharper, more accusing. You think you're too good for us now? Eric says you're just bitter. You're letting money change you. I ignored them. Every message was proof that they still didn't understand. It wasn't money that had changed me. It was betrayal. Then something interesting happened. A cousin who had always stayed quiet, one of the few who never chimed in on the guilt-tripping, reached out privately. Luke, she wrote, I know what Eric did. I don't agree with it. I just didn't know how to speak up before. But you're right to keep your distance. He's dragging everyone down. That message, simple as it was, fueled me. It reminded me that truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how much Eric and Aunt Donna tried to twist it. By the time I hit 28, I wasn't the same person who had walked out of Aunt Donna's house. broken and exhausted. I was sharper, more deliberate, and, for the first time in my life, I had leverage. I wasn't just surviving their games anymore. I was in a position to end them. And as fate would have it, the opportunity came knocking sooner than I expected. Because Eric, true to form, was about to overreach again. And this time, I wasn't just going to protect myself. I was going to make sure he paid for every smug laugh, every stolen moment, every forged signature. It was almost eerie how naturally the opportunity fell into my lap. By then, I had learned to stop reacting impulsively to Eric's antics and instead observe from a distance, waiting. I knew he'd eventually slip. He always did. And when he did, I'd be ready. The moment came during a quarterly work mixer, of all places. I was chatting with a colleague from the lending department at one of the banks we partnered with, just casual conversation over a glass of wine. Out of nowhere, she mentioned how their branch had been seeing an uptick in suspicious loan applications. It's always the same kind of pattern, she said. People forging documents, trying to rope in relatives with better credit scores. We've flagged a few names recently. I tried to act casual, but my ears were buzzing. Suspicious applications. Relatives roped in. I asked her, offhand, if she could elaborate. She laughed lightly, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. Well, I shouldn't go into detail, but let's just say one guy's name keeps popping up in the system. Eric Donovan. You wouldn't believe how many times his paperwork gets bounced back. My glass froze halfway to my lips. Eric. He wasn't just reckless, he was reckless on record. He was leaving a trail behind him, one that was starting to get attention from people who actually had the power to do something about it. I nodded, masking the rush of adrenaline coursing through me. Funny, I said smoothly. I know him. She rolled her eyes. Oh, then you know exactly what I mean. That night, lying awake in my apartment, I thought about what she had said. Eric wasn't just a personal problem anymore. He was a liability, and the system was already watching him. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to fight him alone. If I positioned myself right, all I had to do was open the right doors and let his own recklessness do the rest. In the meantime, I doubled down on my network. I invited that same colleague and a few others out for dinner, strengthening the kind of relationships that weren't about small talk, but trust. I listened more than I spoke, absorbing details about how fraud investigations worked, about how banks flagged suspicious patterns, about what tipped the scales from annoying customer to potential legal case. And while I was doing that, I kept tabs on Eric. Social media made it easy. He couldn't resist bragging. Every other post was about his next big thing, complete with hashtags about grind culture and building empires. The irony was bitter. His empire was built on sand, and he had no idea the tide was coming in. But the real turning point came a month later, when I got a frantic call from a different cousin. Luke, you need to know, Eric's been saying you're backing his new business. He's telling people you invested. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile creeping across my face. So Eric was using my name again, casually attaching me to his mess like it was his birthright. That was the mistake I had been waiting for. He had tied my reputation to his scheme without my permission, and now I had proof, screenshots of texts, posts, even a recorded voicemail from someone he was trying to rope in. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even surprised. I felt calm, controlled, because now I held more than frustration. I held leverage. I knew people in the right places, and I had evidence in my hands. Evidence Eric couldn't laugh off, couldn't smash against the wall like a phone. And I decided then that I wouldn't rush it. Revenge wasn't about striking fast. It was about striking when the blow would land the hardest. So I waited. I gathered. I prepared. And the more I learned, the more I realized just how devastating it would be when the time came to pull the trigger. Eric thought he had played me for the fool, the cousin too rigid to fight back. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't just going to get even. I was going to make sure his games ended for good. By the time the pieces all lined up, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot. It burns quick and reckless. What I felt instead was something colder, sharper, a kind of clarity that made every step deliberate. Eric's downfall started not with me storming into his life, but with me quietly stepping out of it. I stopped answering his calls, stopped reacting to his digs online, stopped giving him the satisfaction of knowing I was paying attention. To him, it probably looked like I had moved on. But in the background, I was pulling threads together, tightening the net I'd been weaving for months. The first step was the evidence. Screenshots of his posts bragging that I had invested in his business. Recordings from people he'd tried to swindle, where he'd dropped my name like a free pass. Copies of the forged paperwork, all neatly stored and time-stamped. I didn't keep them on my laptop or phone. Those were too easy to tamper with. I had them secured in a cloud vault and backed up with a friend in law enforcement, just in case anything happened to me. The second step was positioning. Through my network at the bank, I learned that Eric had already raised red flags with multiple institutions. He wasn't just annoying loan officers anymore. He was teetering on the edge of being flagged for formal investigation. All it would take was the right nudge to push him over. That nudge came at a family gathering I decided, very deliberately, to attend. It had been months since I'd shown my face, and when I walked in, the room fell into that awkward silence that only happens when people don't know whether to welcome you or glare at you. Aunt Donna plastered on a smile, hugged me with stiff arms, and whispered, "I'm glad you came. Maybe we can finally put this behind us." But Eric couldn't help himself. The moment I sat down, he raised his glass and smirked. "Look who finally decided to join us. Mr. Moneybags himself. Don't worry, everyone, my business partner's here now, so we're good." The word partner hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. My jaw tightened, but I didn't rise to it. Instead, I smiled politely and let him ramble, boasting about his expansion plans, sprinkling my name into every other sentence. People nodded, some skeptical, some eager, but all of them were listening. That was when I struck. Calmly, almost casually, I pulled out a folder from my bag and placed it on the table. "Funny you say that, Eric," I said evenly, "because I brought something to clear the air." He laughed nervously, eyes darting to the folder. "What's this, more of your spreadsheets?" "No," I said, sliding the papers across the table for everyone to see. "This is documentation. Evidence of the loan applications with my forged signature. Evidence of the posts where you claimed I invested in your business. Evidence of the messages where you told people I was backing you financially. All of it." The room went silent. Chairs creaked as relatives leaned in, scanning the pages. Eric's face drained of color, then flushed bright red. "This is out of context," he stammered. "Luke's twisting things." "Out of context," I interrupted, my voice still calm. "Because I also submitted this evidence to the bank's fraud department last week. And they've already flagged your name. You'll probably be getting a call soon." The effect was immediate. Aunt Donna's fork clattered against her plate. "Luke, you didn't." "I did," I said, locking eyes with her. "Because this isn't just family drama anymore. This is fraud. This is criminal. And if you think I'm going to let my name, my future, and my career be destroyed because you both think I should just let it go, you're dead wrong." Eric sputtered, his words tumbling out in incoherent bursts. You can't. This is family, Luke. You can't do this to me." For the first time in years, I felt a strange, powerful calm wash over me. "You did this to yourself, Eric. I'm just making sure the consequences land where they belong." I stood, tucked the folder back into my bag, and left the table without another word. Behind me, the silence was deafening, broken only by Aunt Donna's panicked voice hissing at Eric as the rest of the family sat frozen, processing what they had just seen. And later that week, when Eric finally did get that call from the bank, followed by a visit from people who weren't nearly as forgiving as his mother, the look on his face must have been priceless. The fallout was swift, and for once, it didn't fall on me. Eric tried to bluff his way through the bank's inquiries, but paperwork doesn't bend to charm or bravado. His applications, his forged signatures, his trail of inconsistencies, it was all there in black and white. Within weeks, his accounts were frozen. Creditors started circling like vultures, demanding repayment for debts he had thought he could outrun. Calls came at all hours, letters piled up on Aunt Donna's doorstep, and the same relatives who had once pitted him now whispered about his bad choices behind his back. But the real hammer dropped when law enforcement got involved. Forgery and fraud aren't family squabbles, they're crimes. I'll never forget the night I got a text from that cousin who had supported me quietly all along. They just took Eric out in handcuffs. For a moment, I just sat there, phone in hand, staring at the words. I didn't feel joy exactly. What I felt was heavier, deeper, a release of something I had been carrying for far too long. The knot in my chest finally loosened. He had done this to himself, and no one could twist the story to make me the villain anymore. Aunt Donna tried, of course. She called me in tears, begging me to intervene, saying Eric was still family, and that I couldn't let his life be ruined like this. But my voice didn't shake when I answered. No, Aunt Donna, I won't clean up his mess anymore. You told me once that if I loved my family, I'd let it go. Well, if you loved me, you would have stopped him before it came to this. She went quiet after that, and for the first time, I think she understood. Over the months that followed, the family dynamic shifted. Some kept their distance, embarrassed by how they had sided against me. Others reached out, apologizing for not speaking up sooner. I didn't hold grudges against the ones who stayed silent. They weren't the ones who forged my name. But I also didn't forget who laughed when Eric mocked me, who texted me to stop being dramatic. Eric ended up serving time. Not much, his lawyer cut a deal, but enough to shatter whatever illusion of invincibility he had built around himself. When he came out, thinner, quieter, no longer smirking, he barely made eye contact with me at the few gatherings he dared to attend. The swagger was gone, replaced by something else. Fear, maybe, or the knowledge that he had finally been forced to face the consequences he'd dodged for years. And me? I kept climbing. My career flourished, my investments grew, and I built a life free from the weight of his chaos. I didn't need to rub it in his face. The contrast spoke for itself. I drove to family reunions in my new car, carried myself with calm confidence, and when people whispered, it wasn't about me being stingy. It was about how Eric had destroyed his own chances. The final moment came at another family dinner, years later. Eric was there, silent, picking at his food while others chatted around him. At one point, he looked up at me, his eyes hollow, and muttered, "You ruined my life." I set my fork down, met his gaze steadily, and replied, "No, Eric. I stopped you from ruining mine." The room went quiet, the weight of the truth sinking in. I picked my fork back up and finished my meal, and no one, not even Aunt Donna, had the courage to say another word. That was the end of it, and for the first time in years, I felt free.